Sorry for the jump scare. This is TikToker emotions.in.life, and as you can probably tell, he has some emotions in life. If you're already familiar with this man, it may make sense why he's screaming, and even if you are familiar, it may still not make sense. The intention of his videos is that he passionately expresses the emotions that his audience wishes could express themselves, out of frustration with their personal lives, primarily their relationships. His account is very successful, with 2.7 million subscribers, and while his views may vary, he consistently pulls in at least tens of thousands of views on TikTok, and sometimes hundreds of thousands, and sometimes millions. Some of these viewers might be laughing at him, but most of the comments seem to be sincere. It's safe to say there's an audience for this stuff. These people have real problems in their lives, and they have real emotions in life. But it does beg the question of why this man screaming, and I mean screaming, in his car resonates with them so much. Passion is normal, healthy even, but I think most of us can agree this is kind of extreme. That being said, I can't help but think it represents something about social media's impact on our ability to regulate our emotions and to manage normal aspects of adult life. For many, everything feels out of control, and emotions feel like too much. Something you'll also notice about emotions in life's videos is that they're very self-centered, even though they're told from a third-person perspective. The person being spoken about, the person watching, is always the victim who's been done a great injustice. They're always dealing with problems that nobody else in their life could conceive of. It validates their feelings that everything is as intense and important as it feels to them. The attitudes towards relationships are more akin to those of someone in high school. Yet, the people commenting are of varying ages, normally well into adulthood. Emotions in life's content and his audience's receptiveness to it is symptomatic of a lack of emotional maturity that we would expect from adults. It increasingly feels that social media has made us impatient and emotionally stunted. The internet is filled with posts from people who find themselves increasingly frustrated with their inability to navigate the world they inhabit. But how do we get here, and what implications does this have for us all? This is the internet is eating itself, and let's get into it. A 2024 meta-analysis encompassing 7,441 studies, and including subjects up to 5 years old, examined how screen time affected cognitive and psychosocial development. Concerningly, it found that program viewing, the passive consumption of audiovisual media such as watching TV and videos on social media, was associated with worse psychosocial and cognitive development, with age-inappropriate content and a caregiver distracted by a screen producing the worst psychosocial results. Even just having a TV on in the background was found to have small negative effects. There's nuance to this though, with co-use, a parent and child watching TV together, having a link to positive cognitive development. While the study was large in scale, it did have some limitations, such as differences in research methods used by the studies covered, and a limited view of how race and ethnicity factored into the results. There's no better example than CoComelon though when it comes to the grip that visual stimulation has on children, with 195 million subscribers on their YouTube channel and videos that consistently get millions, and sometimes billions, of views, as well as a successful presence on Netflix. The CoComelon trend on TikTok perhaps illustrates this best, with children immediately stopping what they're doing and coming running to the TV when they hear its intro music. Parents have described their children as going into quote-unquote zombie mode and even called it CoComelon. Despite parent company Moonbug's mission being to empower kids all over the world with essential life skills, and its belief that CoComelon displays core values of compassion, empathy, and resilience, CoComelon's metric of success will always be view duration, as that's what equates to ad dollars. And they achieve this by always keeping kids locked in with shots that never linger more than 5 seconds, often just 1 or 2, along with extremely bright colors. As Rachel Barr, a professor in developmental psychology at Georgetown University, describes, the YouTube era has produced a lot of shows that are frenetic, sort of bedazzling, high on the cognitive load. This style drives us to pay attention. Our visual systems, Barr said, are geared to reflexively orient towards rapid changes, but it can overwhelm a child's ability to encode the content, as she put it. That is, to actually learn anything. This is despite CoComelon's claims that their content is educational. But even as early as 2011, researchers found that 4-year-old kids performed worse in executive function tests after just 9 minutes of fast-paced cartoons, compared to 9 minutes of educational TV. It's important to point out the limitations of this study, namely that only 60 children were involved and only ones of a very specific age. But if we consider just how much faster paced cartoons are now, that would have serious implications if pace plays even a small role in executive function and development. The difference really is quite stark when comparing CoComelon to a low stimulation cartoon. It's questionable whether any pediatricians are involved in the production of CoComelon, or at least whether they seriously inform the content of the show. Compare CoComelon to a show like Sesame Street, which has been the subject of over 1,000 studies on its impact on young viewers' learning, due in part to its hiring of Harvard professors and having its educational effectiveness measured by independent external bodies. Bright colours are used while not employing too many at any given time, as well as utilizing an inner-city set design to make it relatable to the disproportionately less well-off children who lived in those areas. Sesame Street is designed to encourage mental stimulation in its audience through the stories it tells, while CoComelon moves too fast for anything to actually sink in, instead encouraging passive consumption. Today's young adults grew up before CoComelon, but are the first generation to grow up completely immersed in social media. Now, there's some ambiguity around this. What counts as social media? What counts as growing up with it? What percentage of each actually used it growing up, etc.? But just to illustrate what I'm talking about, if you were 5 when Facebook came out, you'd be 25 now. In fact, many former iPad kids are now teens and adults. For those who spent a sizable amount of time on social media at a young age, they avoided much of the need for sustained focus. Like a CoComelon video, there was a constant stream of new distractions, and we're seeing the results of this play out in the lives of the current crop of 20-somethings. The prioritization of endless, visually stimulating content over mentally stimulating environments potentially deprived us of the actual life experiences that are so key to our formative years. Dr. Anna posted an excellent video on this recently, where she talked about the importance of experiences to the process of maturing as a human.
Developmental neuroscience acknowledges that the brain matures not just through the passing of time, but also because of life experiences, environment, and culture. Both human and animal studies have demonstrated that stimulating environments lead to neural development.
As a result, many of us have been struggling in the adult world. If we take a look at the youngest generation to enter adulthood, Gen Z, we get a picture of a generation lagging behind typical milestones, such as entering full-time work, financial independence, moving out, getting married, and having a child, all of which are happening later than previous generations. A 2024 survey even found that 1 in 4 Gen Zs had brought a parent to a job interview in the past year, a stat that's almost hard to believe. But these delays aren't something that outwardly troubles much of Gen Z. As is typical, it's instead been meme-ified. The 27-year-old teenage girl, the 30-year-old pregnant teenager, or that diabolical "I'm just a baby" sound. Maybe that last one's more applicable to millennials. They arguably started all this, after all, with the word adulting entering their lexicon in the 2010s and being slapped on a bunch of graphic tees in the years since. But there does seem to be a pretty widespread developmental delay among Gen Z, to the extent that there was vocal concern when influencer Nara Smith had 4 children by the age of 23, despite generally seeming to have her life together. This was underpinned in part by a perception that, because the prefrontal cortex doesn't finish developing until the age of 25, she couldn't possibly be responsible enough for 3 kids.
When adults learn a new instrument, not just children, their corpus callosum gets bigger. So this notion that the brain is ever fully mature or complete or cooked is an incorrect one. The brain might be mainly matured by mid-20s, but ideally we keep growing and changing and strengthening neurologically throughout our lives.
Much of this has been rationalized as a response to the state of the world, specifically the tougher economic climate in some countries and cuts to entry-level roles, potentially due to AI, that are giving graduates a hard time, so people are looking out for themselves more. COVID also isolated a lot of young people indoors during much of their formative years, especially uni and college students, who missed out on collective experiences like clubs and partying. And it seems to be young people of all political persuasions who have adopted this mindset. The typical Ayn Rand types, sure, but also those who proclaim to be collectivists. Of course, there's figures like former US Navy SEAL David Goggins, whose hugely successful book, Can't Hurt Me, and motivational speeches have taught millions the power of rugged independence and accountability. But it's not always ex-Navy SEAL types or obnoxious podcast bros saying this stuff. often is cloaked in the language of self-care, the importance of lighting candles, taking baths, and taking the day off work. This mentality has given rise to a toxic attitude towards relationships, platonic or otherwise. There's phrased in terms that sound like healthy boundary setting, maturity even. It prioritizes not being exploited or taken advantage of, both good things. This might be the product of years of seeing unhealthy relationships on social media, or maybe unhealthy relationships in their own families. But what was seemingly healthy has turned into latching onto certain phrases and running with them, using them as justification for being kind of a shitty person. Take protecting my peace. It makes sense after all. You can't function without some degree of peace in your life. But this phrase has been used to cut people off for minor infractions, for anything even slightly disruptive to one's own personal peace. And that's not realistic. You're missing out on a lot if your life becomes purely about your own comfort. I don't owe anyone anything is maybe the worst culprit when it comes to phrases used as a blanket excuse for shitty behavior though. Whether that be not turning up on time, flaking at short notice, or even ghosting. It's become something of an epidemic. Do you owe your parents for raising you? No, they're legally obligated to care for you and nurture you, but you're probably respectful towards them because they mean something to you, unless they really are that abusive or toxic to you. Do you owe your friends friendship? Nobody's entitled to anyone's friendship, but we're friends because it's nice to have friends, and that means making compromises, respecting their time, doing them favors sometimes. You can't expect people to like you if you never compromise for anyone else. Relationships are about give and take. What we do owe one another is decency. It's what makes life bearable. The problem is that this feels like something you would tell a child. It almost feels kind of patronizing saying it out loud. But what is being espoused by certain people online as maturity is actually immaturity, a refusal to see the world beyond themselves. This individualistic mindset is having implications for our sense of community, and it's no coincidence that these are often the same people who complain about a lack of real-world community. Many feel lonely and disconnected, wanting what previous generations had. This is often down to a lack of third places, informal gathering locations that are neither home nor work, serving as hubs for conversation and building community, or is put down to not having enough free time, or having social anxiety, or poor mental health. This is cyclical too. Anxiety might cause difficulty socializing, which makes future socializing even more anxiety-inducing. But maybe the biggest factor in all of this is the inability to compromise. People want community, but they want it perfectly suited to them. They won't join a local book club because it's not focused on their favorite genre, or they won't join in on local sport because it's not their favorite type. This might be fine if there was a willingness to start their own clubs or community, but there isn't. Whether it's down to social anxiety or laziness or entitlement, take your pick. Many of the people who talk about revolution and overthrowing power structures are the same ones who are too anxious to talk to a stranger, or itching to find a point of disagreement so they can discard them. The tolerance for annoying people is extremely low, and yet there's always been annoying people and community thrived in spite of, or even because of them. The difference is there was no choice, and we're now accustomed to blocking people, maybe sometimes for valid reasons. But tolerance for people we don't like has dropped beyond those that are actually counterproductive to community, and this makes it harder to see past our differences. It increasingly feels like we're stuck at the school playground, struggling to be nice with the other kids. In over 2 decades of social media, it's become increasingly effective at hooking us in and monetizing our attention for ad dollars. We've gone from simple websites for connecting with friends to hyper-addictive feeds of short-form video content. This has deprived us of the real-world experiences necessary for brain development, and the research is increasingly clear on this, even if further research is needed. It's created a generation that struggles to integrate in existing communities, or even create communities with the same frequency and effectiveness as previous generations. Instead, they've created a language to rationalize this, making the lack of community an inevitable byproduct instead of coming to terms with the core problems they face. And these problems will continue to be passed on to younger generations, even snowballing, as parents plonk them in front of CoComelon, a show produced by people who transparently do not give a shit about children's brain development. For time-poor, stressed parents, it's understandable why, of course. It's not a responsibility I'd choose to take on myself. But I'm not convinced a kid raised on CoComelon is going to be worth the trade-off down the line. We're already seeing the result of a generation raised on stuff that's half as potent, and many are reclusive, awkward, and unable to process their emotions in life. But what do you think? Do the younger generations have as big of a problem when it comes to maturity as I'm saying, or have I overblown this? Am I simply latching onto the usual talking points about younger generations that turn out to just be misunderstandings and assumptions? Let me know in the comments down below and hit those like and subscribe buttons while you're down there. I release a new video every couple of weeks. Also, I recently hit 10k subscribers, so thanks to all of you that have hit that button. Until next time, see ya.